Well, good morning, probably afternoon to most of you today. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on Texas lending. I know I was very excited about this today to learn a little bit more about lending in Texas. I'm your host today, David Thompson, with Docutech, and with me I have Fred Gooch with Gooch Law. And welcome, Fred.
Thanks, David.
So this morning we're going to be talking about a couple things. I believe we're going to be talking about Homestead, correct me if I'm wrong, and then community property, and then also unlawful practice.
Yep, the unauthorized practice of law statute.
Unauthorized practice
Yep.
of law. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hand the time over to Fred. Before we get started, if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit those in the question portal on GoToWebinar. And also, we will be sending out a sheet of the webinar so you can view that after the webinar or go over that with your team if you'd like to. So, Fred, go right ahead.
Thanks, David. So today we're going to be talking about some of the complexities that you need to deal with when making mortgage loans in Texas. And this webinar is jointly sponsored by Docutech and by my law office, Fred Gooch Law. And I have served as Docutech's legal counsel for 12 years, counseling the company and giving them advice as to their products and services to make sure that they're compliant with all the applicable rules and regulations. And I've also had my own law practice that primarily focuses on the origination of mortgage loans in Texas. And we have built an integration into Docutech's Conformex system that allows you to streamline your processes when making loans in the state of Texas. And so, I mean, really, both firms are united by a common goal, and we want to deliver solutions to you that are going to make your life easier when you're lending in Texas to enable you to achieve full compliance and efficiency. So we're going to talk about a few of the complexities of lending in the state of Texas. We're going to talk a little bit about the community property rules in the state of Texas. We will talk about the homestead provisions, and we'll talk about the unauthorized practice of law. The other large item that is very complicated and requires a lot of attention when lending in the state of Texas is Texas's home equity laws. And we'll do another webinar that's specifically dedicated to equity lending in Texas here probably in a couple months. But that's just too much to cover in a brief webinar like this. So we'll focus on community property, homestead, and the unauthorized practice of law. So Texas is a community property state. And so what does that mean? Well, we'll look at some definitions from the Texas Code here. It tells us that community property is the property other than separate property acquired by either spouse during marriage. So property that's not separate property that is acquired by either spouse during marriage. So in order to know what community property is, you have to know what separate property is. Separate property is defined as property that's owned or claimed by the spouse before marriage. So property essentially that one spouse brings into the marriage is their separate property. You also have property that is acquired by a spouse during the marriage by gift, devise, or by descent. So if they receive property through one of these channels, then it can be classified as their separate property as well. And then there is another category of separate property which generally doesn't apply to mortgage lending, but it would be the recovery of personal injuries that are sustained by a spouse during the marriage. And then there's an exclusion for a recovery of loss of earning capacity during the marriage. That kind of a recovery would still be considered community property. So unless the property is obtained by the spouse through one of these methods that would classify it as separate property, it is considered community property in the state of Texas.
So, Fred, I had a quick question. Why is that last little bit about community property? Why is that important for people who lend in Texas?
Yes, that's the important question. It's important to be able to classify the property correctly so that you can, especially when it comes to real property, to know whether it is separate property or whether it's community property, so that you can determine who has an interest in the property. Someone could have, a spouse could have an interest in the property even though their name is not included on the deed because the property was acquired during the marriage. So you need to be able to properly identify who has an interest in the property that you're dealing with. You also need to know this information because you need to know whose signatures are required to create a valid security interest in the property, which of course enables, make sure that you have the ability to foreclose your loan if the borrower defaults.
So another reminder for you guys, if you do have any questions throughout our webinar, please feel free to submit those. If we don't have time to get to them today on the webinar, we will definitely send out answers to you individually after the webinar. So please continue.
It's also important for community property to make sure that you know who has an interest in the property, to determine who has a right to rescind under Texas and under federal law, as well as knowing whose signatures are required if you are doing a home equity loan in the state of Texas. So it's really important to pay attention to these, to the property and to whether someone may have an interest in that property due to Texas's community property statute. So the next thing that we are going to discuss for a few minutes here is Texas's homestead laws. And homestead exemptions are a long-standing feature of Texas law. We have a section in the Constitution that is specifically dedicated to homesteads. And why is that important? Well, Texas's homestead law gives protection from the claims of creditors from the homestead. The homestead is exempt from any of the claims of creditors except for specific types of claims that are outlined in the Texas Constitution. So it's really, really important to pay attention there, because if you want to have a valid lien, you need to make sure that it complies with the restrictions on the homestead. Also, you have the property tax exemption to look at. So that's kind of why homestead is important. And there are two different kinds of homesteads that are designated under Texas law. You've got an urban homestead and you've got a rural homestead. So we'll look at these two different kinds. The first is the most common, is the urban homestead. Now the urban homestead is defined as it's not more than 10 acres of land. It's in one or more contiguous lots together with the improvements. And the definition of the urban homestead is restricted to a family or a single adult person. Now, a homestead is considered to be urban if it's located within the limits of a municipality or its extraterritorial jurisdiction or a platted subdivision, and it has to be served by police protection, paid or volunteer fire protection, and at least of the following services provided by a municipality under contract to a municipality. And so those municipal services are electric, natural gas, sewer, storm sewer, and water. And there's your reference in the Texas Property Code relating to an urban homestead. The other type of homestead that you have in the state of Texas is a rural homestead. And the rural homestead consists of not more than 200 acres in one or more parcels with improvements for a family, or not more than 100 acres in one or more parcels with improvements for a single adult. So you can have an urban homestead, but it can be larger, but it can't have all of the characteristics of a urban homestead in order to qualify as rural.
So this might be my question for the day. Can you tell me why, for people that live in Texas, why is this important for them to know?
So the most important thing is that the Texas homestead exemption excludes the homestead from all but certain specifically enumerated liens that are listed in the Texas Constitution. And these certain liens are purchase money, property taxes, work and material used to construct improvements on the property. If it has to be specifically contracted for in writing for these improvements to be able to have a valid lien against the homestead. You've got the refinancing of liens against the homestead, including tax liens. So that's would be your rate and term refinance of a purchase money is the most common situation that you would have there. Also, you have a divorce partition, or credit extensions authorized by Section 50A6 of the Texas Constitution. And this is the home equity section of the Constitution that provides all the rules and restrictions that you have to comply with in order to have a valid lien against a homestead. So it's commonly known as Texas home equity rules. And then you've got certain reverse mortgages. So kind of back to why this is important. When making a loan in Texas, you need to be very careful to ensure that you're creating a valid lien against a homestead. It has to be for one of these specific purposes. You also need to make sure that you are making a loan that is properly classified, whether it is a home equity loan or whether it is a different kind of loan. Because if you are making a home equity loan, you have to comply with all the provisions of Section 50A6 of the Texas Constitution. Otherwise, you essentially lose your security interest in the property, and your loan is unsecured. And so if you are, right, you just got to properly classify it and make sure that you're abiding by all of the rules and complying with all of the things that you've got to do to make sure that you've got a valid lien against the homestead. The homestead is a venerable kind of a sacred cow in the world of Texas, especially considering the fact that these provisions have been in the Texas Constitution. It's a long-standing area of the law that is really requires special attention in mortgage lending. Okay, on to the next section that we're going to talk about, which is Texas's unauthorized practice of law statute. And that's something to be very careful with in the world of drafting legal instruments and mortgage documents. So we'll go over what this means. The Texas Government Code defines the practice of law as the preparation of a pleading or other document that is incident to a service rendered out of court, including the giving of advice or rendering of any service requiring the use of a legal skill or knowledge, such as preparing a contract, will, or instrument, the legal effect of which, under the facts and conclusions involved, must be carefully determined. So, two key things here in this section of the Government Code. The use of legal skill or knowledge and preparing a legal instrument are two things that are considered in the practice of law. So if you look at some of the opinions on the unauthorized practice of law, it's been held that the proper drafting of legal instruments, or even selecting the proper form of an instrument, necessarily affects important legal rights and is thus the practice of law. So drafting of legal instruments that affect important legal rights is considered the practice of law. Now, there are complex issues when lending in the state of Texas. We've talked about community property, we've talked about homestead, we've talked about the unauthorized practice of law, and we've touched on home equity lending. If you look at some of the commentary from the Texas state legislature, they stated that the preparation of notes, deeds of trust, and other instruments affecting the title to real property constitutes the practice of law because of the complexity of the law involved and the potential for customer abuse is great. So the legislature has recognized that preparing instruments that affect the title of real property, because they're complex and because it's generally a large purchase that could be the largest purchase that a consumer ever makes, that the potential for consumer abuse is great in these situations. So if you go look at the government code again, it states also that a person other than an attorney licensed in the state of Texas cannot charge or receive, directly or indirectly, any compensation for all or any part of the preparation of a legal instrument affecting the title to real property, including a deed of trust, note, mortgage, and transfer or release of lien. So you need to be very conscious that you're not charging fees for document preparation related to these documents that affect the title of real property. That is a violation of Texas law. The only person or persons who can charge those fees is an attorney licensed in the state of Texas.
So tell me, Fred, why is this section important, and maybe more detail of maybe even repercussions too? I mean, obviously, unauthorized practice of law in the state of Texas is important, but why?
Yep. Yeah, you would be subject to substantial penalties for violating the law. I don't have the information on specifically what those penalties are in these slides, but there is a significant penalties that are associated with the unauthorized practice of law in any state, let alone the state of Texas. Now, I mentioned that it's very important to make sure that you are careful with the way that you deal with your document preparation fees on your loan, and you also need to be sure that you retain legal counsel to help you comply with the Texas Unauthorized Practice of Law statute. So you would obtain legal counsel if you're not lending in the state of Texas, or if you are, you would have legal counsel that would help prepare some of these documents and review these documents so that you are complying with the Texas Unauthorized Practice of Law statute. So this takes us to some of the services that we can provide through our law office and our interface through Conformex. We can help you comply with the Texas UPL statute. We can help with your closing package preparation and review. We can prepare renewal extension exhibits, preparing releases of liens, warranty deeds, as well as rendering legal and compliance advice to you on your particular mortgage transactions. As I mentioned, we've built a simple interface into Conformex where you can send your documents into this review process, and the law office can take care of that review for you. Just another thing to mention here as we cycle through these different services that we can provide. This is just a quick list of some of the features and the benefits and the advantages of utilizing the interface that we've built through Conformex. It gives you access to experienced legal counsel to ensure full compliance and make sure that you can produce quality loans. It's built right into Conformex. It allows you to use one document system, no dual entry. It's easy and streamlined. There's a very short learning curve. It's secure. It provides secure document transmission. It makes sure that you have full safety and security with your loan files, and it ensures both privacy for you and for your consumers. It's a simple interface, easy workflow. It enables you to minimize errors that might take place with dual entry or using different vendors. We also provide excellent customer service. You have quick access to our experts, and we respond to make sure that you can close your loans and answer your questions so that you can comply with these added restrictions that you have in the state of Texas. I think it's also important to note that we do have a good synergy in working with Docutech. I've served as Docutech's counsel for 12 years, and we have an excellent knowledge of the system. So you're not dealing with someone who is not familiar with your closing system. So those are some of the services that we can provide as a law office that are directly integrated into Conformex to make it nice and easy for you.
Well, thank you so much, Fred. I really appreciate you being here today and giving us that information. Very big thank you to everyone who attended our webinar today. We also have another webinar that is coming up next week. Be sure you tune in. It is our compliance panel where we actually answer a lot of questions around compliance in the industry today. If you have any more questions, though, feel free to email us at legal@docutech.com, or you can give us a call at 800-497-3584. And did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage you to submit your questions that you might have for our compliance panel. We really want to spend our time answering your questions and talking about the things that are important to you. So if you have any questions along those lines, please send them in to legal@docutechcorp.com. You can also send any questions that you might have about Texas legal review or Texas lending into legal@docutechcorp.com or to support@fredgoochlaw.com. Either of those email addresses will get you in contact with our team to make sure that we've got all your questions answered, to make sure that we're making your life as easy as possible as we can here.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.